Greetings, my fellow Americans, and welcome to another episode of the Great Montana Conspiracy Podcast. This episode's getting out a bit late. Yesterday was just an insane day for Kalispell, Montana. Towards the evening hours when I normally record and transmit this podcast, we had rain, we had sleet, we had something in between snow, very heavy winds, blowing down power lines, scattered outages. My neighborhood actually went completely black for the evening. There was no way to record, or I could have recorded it, but I couldn't have researched it. I couldn't get on the internet to upload it. I couldn't do anything. So this is getting out a little late. Also, last night the weather just left me with a huge migraine. I would have been able to push through it probably, but quite frankly, I'm sort of grateful the weather actually gave me another option. But nevertheless, this is getting out on a Tuesday, just a few hours late on a Tuesday. As I've mentioned in the past, I usually record these Monday evenings and then broadcast them Tuesdays, and for Saturday's episode, I do the same thing Friday night. But at any rate, today's episode is going to be on the subject of justice. Now, that seems like a very broad topic, and it quite frankly really is. I was in a situation yesterday where I was actually seated across the street from the Flathead County Justice Center, which amounts to basically the Sheriff's Department, the Justice Court, the District Court here in Kalispell. It's also where the jail is. They call it the Flathead County Justice Center. And of course, as I'm looking at this sign, my mind, of course, goes to the inevitable question: how did they get away with naming this building a justice building? There's no justice that comes out of that building. No concept of justice comes out of that building. It's all propaganda. It's all pretense. And so I figured maybe it was time to actually do an episode on the subject of justice. Because why are we doing any of this if we're not talking about what the ultimate goal is? And the ultimate goal has to be justice. And in justice, I mean something fair, equitable. Okay? Now, I'd like to upfront give credit to Clark Niley. I was doing research for this, and I came across an article by Clark, and quite frankly, it was such an all-comprehensive article. It said so many of my points that I was trying to raise. A lot of my content today is going to be coming from that. Not all of it. I mean, a lot of it I've actually, from my own references and my own stuff, but a good portion of it is. I want to give that quote up front, and I'm also going to quote Clark at the end so that I have a credit up front. Shout out, Clark, you're doing a fantastic job. Keep up the good work. And I'm actually going to, this probably end up being like a 2 or 3 part podcast, because quite frankly, the subject matter is so broad, I didn't even get through all of it before I'm realizing this is going to take up my whole time. I could do a 3-hour podcast on the subject alone, and quite frankly, I don't think anyone wants to sit through a 3-hour podcast of me talking. So let's just jump right in. First of all, America, the United States of America, is supposed to be a liberal democracy. And I want to clarify before we even start what that means, because so many people want to say we're not a democracy, we're a republic. The truth is, we're not a true democracy and we're not a true republic. We're kind of a hybrid of both. The founders of our country, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, referred to us as the American experiment, because this wasn't really a true democracy and it wasn't really a true republic. They had problems with both forms. They were concerned the republic was too elite. They were concerned that democracy would lead to an inability to govern over a large distance, along with the concern about corruption and other issues rising within the concepts of influence within the masses. Democracy, the rules and laws are made directly by the people. The people all get together, they all come together, they all say what they want, and then the laws get passed. Inevitably what happens is you have people that become more charismatic in these groups. They hold sway over larger groups. They hold influence over these larger groups. And as a consequence, it really does still come down to the select popular people and kind of a populist kind of government being formed. Quite frankly, dealing with a large countryside, you can't have everybody gather up into a large hall and discuss and vote. It's just not feasible. It works for a small community, perhaps. It does not work for a national standard. A republic, rules are made by representatives. Now, this typically means the representatives are appointed by people of influence in the community, whether it be businesses or local constabularies or whatever, it still becomes a very populist movement. We don't have a true form of either. We have three different forms of, for instance, we have the Senate, which is ruled by, regardless of what the population is in a given state, we have two representatives or two senators from each state. Then we have the House of Representatives, which is represented by population numbers. We have judiciary that's established by both voting and by appointment from directly within the council or within the congressional councils and by executive appointments. We have referendums that go up through elections. We have amendments that are proposed. We have laws and ordinances that are proposed through local elections. So yes, we have a very conglomerate mixture of government. And the best way to call the American experience is a liberal democracy. We are represented. The people do speak out. We do have the ability, especially in today's multimedia. What I'm doing right now is a representation of self-government. I'm expressing my views. I'm expressing the political issues that I think need to be addressed. Therefore, I'm speaking up. This would not happen in a republic. A republic, the voice is exclusively that of the representative. Whoever is what is represented, they go and they become the elite member of whatever governing body you have. And it'd be one ruling body. We don't have one ruling body. We have three branches of government. And they're co-equal, supposedly. But that's another issue altogether. The idea is, because what the founders had dubbed our country was a representative democracy. And I think that's fair to call us that, because we are actually representing, not only, we send our representatives up there, but that's not the end of the process. The people are still very much involved at very liberal levels, at all levels of government. So we are not a true republic. We're not a true democracy. We're somewhere in between. We're a hybrid. And a liberal democracy simply just defines us better. Honestly, I could do another podcast entirely on the differences between a democracy and a republic, and I'd spend a half hours talking about that. But I think I've pretty much covered the high points. So for effective purposes, we are a liberal democracy. Just so we're clear on, as I'm going forward, what that means. Now, in a liberal democracy, a criminal justice system serves one purpose. The purpose in a liberal democracy is to employ state violence to discourage and punish conduct which affects the civil society. It affects how we survive. It affects how we do our day-to-day lives. It applies to our safety from harm. Specifically, this is a system that's designed to protect people from being victimized by other members of the society. Whether it be murder, violent assault, theft, fraud, those are the issues that a criminal justice system and a liberal democracy are supposed to be overseeing. Issues like, what are you wearing? What are you ingesting? Who are you associating with? What political groups are you associated with? Whatever. Who you're having sex with. There have been so many laws through our country of segregation between races, between groups of people, whatever. It's none of this. It's supposed to be part of a criminal justice system. The purpose of a criminal justice system is not to police or criminalize the moral or ethical beliefs of elite groups or vocal groups. That's important. Groups. These groups do not represent every single person in the country. The purpose of a liberal democracy, I had a history teacher who liked to say that a democracy is the will of the majority representing the rights of the minority. And that's a really important distinction, because yes, the majority is supposed to rule, but the minorities are supposed to be represented and at all times not excluded. Except we have become into a society that it's okay, it's become acceptable for our criminal justice system, what we call a criminal justice system, to actually employ a situation and circumstance that it's not at all justice. It's not defending against murder, violent assault, theft, or fraud. There are no victims. Victimless crimes were not part of liberal democracy's framework. It's not the place of a government to decide whether someone can have an abortion. It's not the place of government to decide if somebody can go smoke cannabis, marijuana, MJ, whatever you want to call it. Perhaps it's this place of society to worry about any harm that might be caused by such a person out in society, i.e., drunk driving. If somebody goes out in public and is intoxicated and is driving a vehicle, they can cause harm. At that point, you have victims. When victims occur, or when potential risk is established, then yes, criminal prosecution is necessary. But we have a huge problem in our country of just pursuing the most asinine ideas. There's this whole concept of policing or criminalizing morals or ethical beliefs. It contradicts the very principle of a liberal democracy because the minority interests are not being represented. And in many cases, it's actually the majority interests that are not being identified or protected because it's a minority, an elite group or influence of people with money that are actually influencing the outcome of these issues. It contradicts the very principle to criminalize our differences in a liberal democracy. We should be embracing them. We should be saying, okay, it may not be my beliefs, but to each their own. The Christian faith teaches the idea, and just to be clear, I'm an atheist. I'm not trying to proselytize or preach to anybody. But I recognize that a large percentage of people listening to me are Christian. And the Christian ideal is to turn the other cheek. And that is literally, if you strike me on this cheek, here's my other cheek to strike. That's what it means, folks. To turn the other cheek means if you are struck, you offer the other cheek to get struck. Because Christians, by nature, are pacifists and do not retaliate, punish, or harm anyone else. They are pacifists. They do not obstruct, harm, or cause harm to anyone else. They live in peace because that is Christ's doctrine. In a country that is supposedly ruled by Christian ideals, we're clearly well off track of that. Not that I'm saying that Christian ideals should predominate our country, just that they have. And that's another issue for another time, talking about separation of government and state. But we will not go there right now, because it is, again, too broad an issue. But as I said, when you have an issue that simply separates all concept of what is civil defense and what is a moral or ethical belief or preference, you can't possibly have a liberal democracy, and it's not a justice system anymore. It is a method of pushing ideals and principles that not everybody shares. I'm going to bring out an example. And again, Clark Niley is the one who originally pointed me this. I did do more research on this, by the way. So therefore, it's not entirely from his information, but he is the one who gave me the information from where to start with this idea. In 2007, there was a law passed in Shreveport, Louisiana. It was called the Sagging Pants Law. Literally, it was, if your pants are hanging down past your waist, it's a crime and you can be arrested for it. The law remained on the books for 12 years. In those 12 years, according to information coming from the Shreveport Police Department, there were 726 arrests under this law. 96% of these arrests were black people. To be specific, 699 black people were arrested, only 12 white people were arrested under this law for 12 years. You don't think that's discriminatory? You need to look at those figures again. There's no way that 96% represents a fair and equal percentage of the population of Shreveport, Louisiana. Yes, there is probably a high percentage of black population in that community, but I guarantee it's not 96%. Guarantee it's not 96%. There was a disproportional application of this law towards black people. You would think that just those statistics would be enough to make someone realize that something was wrong. Guess what it took? It took someone being shot and killed and because they would not stop to be arrested. They were shot and killed. The man's name was Anthony Childs. He was a 31-year-old black man. He was shot in February of 2019 and died because he wouldn't pull up his pants. Once again, let me reiterate. The purpose in a liberal democracy is to employ state violence to discourage and punish conduct that threatens the fabric of civil society. How does a pair of pants being lower than the waistline affect civil society? How does it threaten civil society? Is it an assault? Some people might say it's an assault on the senses, but it's a personal perception. It's not hurting anybody. It's certainly not defrauding anybody. It's not stealing from anybody. And it's not murdering anybody. But for 12 years, 699 black people compared to 12 white people were arrested under this law, and one died. And it took that death to finally wake people up and have this law recalled. This is what I'm talking about. This is not criminal justice. There's no justice. The city council of Shreveport, Louisiana decided they didn't want people walking around with pants hanging down. They didn't like how it looked. That group of people, that elitist group of people, decided they didn't want the image of people walking around with their pants down around their waist, below their waist. They arrested, they charged, and they even killed somebody over it. Is that justice, ladies and gentlemen? I hardly think so. Let's look at another issue. A very popular issue around the country right now is cannabis, marijuana, the legalization thereof. As most people know the history. If you don't, I'll give you a very brief one. The reason why cannabis was outlawed has nothing to do with the effects. It has to do with the fact that cannabis is a good alternative to hemp, is a good alternative to canvas, and canvas was being used for rope, and the rope industry pushed and outlawed hemp because they didn't want the competition. Over the years, the perception of it becoming a narcotic and a drug became the predominant, and the issues for which it originally was passed fell into history. But the truth is, we have alcohol that's legal, we have nicotine, which is legal, both of which are far more addictive and harmful to the human body than cannabis. By far. Statistics across the board support this. Just for the record, I don't use it. I don't use any drugs. I don't like the effects of alcohol, and I don't like the effects of prescription pain meds. I have a prescription for pain meds because of my chronic joint pain disease. I literally will have a 10-pill prescription last me 6 months. I only use it when I absolutely have to. I hate the side effects. I don't like being high. I don't like the disorientation associated with it. I don't imbibe, but I strongly support everyone's right to do it if they want to. If you want to go smoke a joint in your house, you want to go shoot up meth in your house, that is your call. It is your right. The government should not be involved in it. That's an ethical choice, ladies and gentlemen. That is a moral choice made by certain people that does not reflect the will of everybody in the country. Clearly not. We have a massive, what we call a drug problem. Now, this being said, once it becomes an issue that affects someone's life, if it becomes predominant, if the pursuit of that drug becomes more predominant than the pursuit of working or taking care of yourself or your children, then absolutely yes. Limits need to be established, and proper limitations for the safeguard and welfare of children and the welfare and safeguards of society do need to be in place. I mentioned drunk driving earlier. If you're out high on meth and you're driving your car and you're under the influence, you pose the risk of harm to the rest of the community. Absolutely. That's a prosecutable issue in my mind. But if you're going to be at home in your own house, should you be criminalized for that? Should you be criminalized just for having it? This is why I bring up cannabis. And this is, by the way, coming from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Okay? According to the 2020 FBI Uniform Crime Report, in 2019, there were more nationwide arrests for marijuana than all violent crimes combined. That means assault, that means murder, that means whatever, robbing, whatever, any violence at all. Every single violent crime added together, there were more marijuana arrests nationwide than violent crimes. And here, and I have the statistics for you. There were 545,602 arrests for marijuana in 2019. 92% of those were just for possession, not for sale and distribution, not for being under the influence, just for possession. 92% of that $545,000 number were just for having it. And by the way, having it can be anything from a little stem to a seed to just a little bit of dust on the inside of a bag. It doesn't even have to be a gram sitting in your hand. It just has to be anything that can be detectable. Residue is enough. Possession. On contrary point, there are only 495,871 violent crimes calculated all across the board. All violent crimes together. Assaults, murder, everything. Violent robbery, whatever. Anything involving violence, 495,871 compared to 545,602. That's a 9% greater difference. There were 9% more arrests for marijuana over all violent crimes combined in 2019. Once again, where does social justice come into this? Once again, and I'm going to recite this, I'm going to keep reciting this because it's so important to recite over again. The purpose in a liberal democracy is to employ state violence to discourage and punish conduct that threatens the fabric of civil society, i.e., that creates victims or harms society, such as murder, violent assault, theft, and fraud. How does having marijuana in your possession affect the fabric of civil society? It affects the perceptions of an elite group of people. And by the way, it's proven this is a minority issue simply by the number of states that have voted by overwhelming majorities to legalize marijuana within the state borders. There's like 33 states right now or something like that that actually have legalized marijuana in some form or another. That means 33 states, the majority of citizens in those states have chosen by mandate. By the way, remember back when I talked about how we're not a republic? This is a perfect example. They put referendums on the books, on the ballots. They put ballot issues up, and they voted to amend their constitutions. They voted to legalize. They did this through propositions. They did this through the idea that we can use the direct electoral people to vote and affect law. Because that's the only way to get government to release its stranglehold on this. People went out and got massive signatures and got ballot issues on the books, on the ballots. They raised them on the ballots. The people voted in overwhelming numbers to popularize this, to legalize it. And Montana legislature, by the way, just for record, twice now Montana has voted to legalize marijuana. Once to legalize marijuana in the form of medical marijuana, and a second to legalize marijuana just across the board. And in both cases, the state legislature came down and have done their level best to stranglehold it. They made it legal, but they're going to make it so costly. When they medical marijuana, they literally limited the number of customers a distillery or a dispensary could have. They stranglehold it with taxes. The taxation, they put a huge tax structure on marijuana to hurt it. to hurt the industry because they still don't want it, even though the people have spoken and said, don't stand in the way of our use of this, either for medical or recreational use. Don't stand in the way. We don't want you to. They're still doing it. They're ignoring the will of the people in order to find ways to discourage it. I was talking to a friend who uses medical marijuana, and she was telling me about how in January, this last year, we actually voted to legalize marijuana in the state of Montana. Not this last year, actually 2 years ago. Yeah. Well, a year and a half ago now, I guess. Um, well, it's November. It was last November we voted to legalize it. As of January 2022, we're finally going to have the will of the people enacted. We referended it back in 2020, but 2022 before we actually see it implemented. But they're going to put a larger tax on the recreational marijuana above the medical marijuana because they can, because it gives them the opportunity to obstruct it. Yes, we can legalize it. We're still going to put the limits on what you can possess. We're still going to put limits on what you can have in your possession, how much you can buy. They're still going to put limits on it, even though the people have said we don't want those restrictions. The legislature is still doing exactly that. They're ignoring the will of the people. This is not justice, ladies and gentlemen. This is not justice. I just did a podcast a couple of weeks ago, just the day before Halloween. I did on Halloween, the laws and crimes that have popped up around the country surrounding Halloween. How, communities don't allow masks. Communities don't allow you to wear a mustache. Communities don't, all these laws. How are they in any manner, shape, or form affecting the fabric of civil society? These are issues that do not largely fall within the doctrine of what a criminal justice system is supposed to be under a liberal democracy. They just don't. We have laws about abortion, we have laws about voting, drugs, alcohol, medical issues, so on and on and on and on, that have nothing to do with whether or not somebody's harmed or somebody's risk of harm. It's just the perceptions of people that don't want something. I don't want this black person to marry my white daughter. So I'm going to go to legislature and I'm going to have a law written that makes it illegal. Ladies and gentlemen, those in American society, that is horrifically wrong. And I certainly hope that all those laws across the country have now been abolished. But those laws did exist on our books. It used to be a hanging offense in El Cajon, California, where I grew up, to steal a horse. It's a capital punishment to steal a horse. Yeah, steal a horse. Okay, great. Let's hang him. It's not just when criminal justice applies to what's appropriate, but the extreme response can often be a mistake as well. We have a serious problem with overcriminalization. It becomes a hot button issue. It becomes an electorate issue. It becomes, hey, we have the power to do it, so let's do it, and let's go ahead and pump this and make people think we're protecting them. You're not protecting you, ladies and gentlemen. They're taking your rights away. Crimes against civil society, that's what a criminal justice system is supposed to represent, not public conduct. The purpose of justice is to act on behalf of victims, not on behalf of an elite idealism. Protect the people of our country from harm, whether it be after the fact or it be a preventive measure. But we're not talking about that here. We're talking about idealism. Again, for instance, alcohol. Does alcohol pose a risk? We had it outlawed for a long time. It was called prohibition. He actually made a constitutional amendment for it, and then turned around and made another constitutional amendment to undo the previous constitutional amendment. All it did was create more crime. And again, at what point does the government decide what we get to ingest? What do we get to drink? What do we get to eat? What do we get? The fact that someone chooses a wrong intoxicant, wrong in parentheses, by the way, that may or may not be harmful to the body, does not justify governmental violence. It doesn't justify arrest. It doesn't justify a fine. It doesn't justify what oftentimes end up being harm, whether it be through a taser or gunfire or just a cop beating the crap out of somebody. It doesn't justify it. It does not justify it, ladies and gentlemen. Criminal justice system does not, or justice system cannot legitimately use force against peaceful people in morally indefensible ways. Cannot. The baseline constitutional limit on government must be that it cannot interfere with people's liberty. What they want to smoke, what they want to eat, drink, who they want to be with, where they want to go, what they want to wear, these are all liberty issues. They're all civil liberty issues. They are not issues that deal with harm to civil society. Government cannot and must not be allowed to interfere where we worship or where we travel or what we ingest. And this is where I'm going to actually quote Clark Niley, because I think this is I was wondering how to take this and look at it and put it in my own words, but quite frankly, the quote itself just stands out so wonderfully. I couldn't improve upon this if I wanted to. Working together, however, the three branches have essentially hacked that limitation using what amounts to a constitutional magic trick, whereby the legislative and executive branches simply lie in court about their true justification for enforcing various laws, and the judiciary pretends to credit those fraudulent explanations for restricting people's freedom. I mean, I couldn't say it better myself. I really couldn't. I thought about how I could put that in my own words, and I couldn't. It sums it up so well. The government, our three tiers of government, they're supposed to be separate and independent. They're supposed to be self-regulating. We're supposed to have checks and balances, have agreed to work in cooperation to empower a so-called criminal justice system to exceed its boundaries by leaps and bounds above what its intentional purpose should be. And they let it happen. We had huge revolts, riots this last year as a consequence of it going too far. And the media, of course, is jumping on the bandwagon and making sure that some of these things, they're focusing largely on the black Americans. But the problem is it exists everywhere. This is just one symptom of a much larger problem. But Clark puts it so nicely, so wonderfully, about how the three branches of government work together, how the legislature will lie about what the reasons for these laws are, the executive will lie about why they're prosecuting it, and the court will go right along and say, okay, yeah, that sounds good to me. Next case. They don't care. They simply don't care. Because they get money out of it. They get power out of it. They get elitism, and they get to pursue their own ideals. They get to express their elite view on the rest of the country. And it's not anyone's position in this country to tell anyone else what to believe, what to drink, what to eat, what to dress, where to go, who to associate with. Nothing. If you are a man and you want to have sex with a man, have sex with a man. I'm not gay. I'm very heterosexual. But yeah, I'm going to embrace you, dude. I'm going to give you a big hug because I don't care. I'm not the least bit challenged in my own sexuality, and I don't think anybody else should be questioning anyone else's sexuality. I had a friend in Bakersfield, knew many years ago, and I won't mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him, just in case he happens to run across this podcast. But one of the things he used to say, and I always used to laugh at this, he used to say that all guys are gay, just all men are gay, but most men are in denial. Because he believed that gay was a natural state of being for men. And I would laugh along with it, and I think, to this day, I still laugh at it. But can you imagine if, let's flip the scales. Let's say gay people gained a predominance in government, and they decided to outlaw heterosexuality. Because someone like my friend's belief became predominant. That all men are gay, most are in denial, and therefore we're going to outlaw anyone who believes otherwise. That is a perception and a perpetration of a moral and ethical belief on the people. Now, obviously, I don't think that's ever going to happen. Hopefully it doesn't happen, because quite frankly, I'd like to think that we're gradually moving towards equality when it comes to gay and LGBTQR rights. Sorry, I probably got the LGBTQ rights. Sorry, I get that mixed up so often. It's not a matter of disrespect. It's just the letters flip-flop in my head. Mild dyslexia. But regardless, the point is, I'm all for everyone having the right to believe what they want to believe, do what they want to do, be with who they want to be with. But our country passes laws all the time that step outside the boundaries of what they're supposed to be doing. And the people let them, because they think that somehow the people in power get to govern what is right. What is right, ladies and gentlemen, is that we all have beliefs. We all have the right to believe those beliefs. We have the right to do with our bodies as we choose to do with our bodies, so long as we do not harm anyone else in doing so, or put anyone else at risk of harm. That's the bottom line. But regardless of how bad this is across the country, Flathead County is worse. I mean, we're talking on steroids worse. 99% of prosecutions in this county are successful. They're overloaded. They're not. Most of them are held in detention. I've done previous podcasts on this subject, pretrial detention, until they break down and are willing to take a plea deal, just to try to get some measure of their lives back. We have no grand juries. No evidence is required to bring information before a judge. Judge simply signs it. Whatever. Prosecutor can literally say, "You effed a cat." The judge will sign it, and you'll go to jail. It doesn't have to be true. No evidence, no investigation is even required. Just all the prosecutor says it, the person goes to jail. There is no probable cause hearing. There is no grand jury. There is nothing, ladies and gentlemen, protecting from the sheer magnitude of placing this yoke upon the citizens of this county. And people are terrified to speak up. People are terrified to speak up. They're afraid of what happened to me. I'm a living example. I was a law-abiding citizen. I ran a youth recreations program, had been running it for 7 years. No criminal record whatsoever except a couple moving violations. That's it. A couple moving violations. No criminal conduct. If they wanted to stop me, let's abduct some children. Let's throw them in and terrorize them. And look where I ended up. People see that. People learn from that. People are afraid of that. But I always go back to Benjamin Franklin. We must all hang together, or surely we shall all hang separately. So where is justice when the concepts of justice are not even being pursued? Flathead County Justice Center is a joke. There is no justice that goes on. Very little justice that goes on within that building. It is not a center for justice. It is a center for propaganda. And until the American people wake up and see that, until the citizens of Flathead County wake up and see that, nothing is going to change. Therefore, as always, I encourage, if you hear this message and you believe in what I'm saying, by all means, share this video. You share it with 10 people, they share it with 10 people, we've got 100 people. If you see this podcast and there's not an information attached to it, by all means, visit me on YouTube. Look for the Great Montana Conspiracy Podcast. Like and subscribe. The more people that like me, the more people that subscribe, the more information I get out there. There are people who are dedicated out there to making sure my message is not heard. I do get the statistics on my videos. I am able to see that there are many people that watch this video for just a couple seconds, long enough to click the dislike button and then move on. They don't even listen to it. They don't want my message to be heard. So ignore any statistics you see on the videos. Pay attention to the message. The message is important. As always, if you want to support us, the information is there. You want to spread the information out there. If you want to go to the central core of this information, that's monspiracy.podbean.com. And any information blurb that's attached to this video will definitely be there, if for some reason you're seeing this video and that's not attached. As always, I hope anyone listening to this, please be safe. Whenever possible, please be free. Thank you.